Song for the end. Have a song for the end. There we go then. Come on, let's get some of the lads together. Let's have a good idea. Okay, yeah, all right. Go on, fellas. Get around the piano. Let's have a good go. Come on, then. You ready? Come on, you lot. Go on, then. Oh, 'tis our delight for the red and white. The imps are here to stay. Oh, 'tis our delight for the red and white. The imps are here to stay. Lincoln City are the team, the Reds is their name. Stinsel Bank is their home ground and football is their game. So come and cheer them on, you lads, support them all the way. Oh, 'tis our delight for the red and white. The imps are here to stay. Oh, 'tis our...
Morning all, just to show I'm on a proper dog walk. There's the dog. He's not particularly happy, it's humid this morning, but it's a good opportunity to get out and talk to you. Apologies, I actually meant to go on about 10 minutes ago. Just had a call to take, so I'm aware one or two of you have been hanging on, so I appreciate that. Morning Steve, hope you're well, pal. So the big news really, last night, Regan Poole joined Portsmouth. I'm not going to go into that, I've done an article on it. It doesn't warrant any more comment. To give it more comment, I think focus is too much on somebody else's player now, so I'm not going to do that. But what he did do was ignite a conversation, ignite a debate that I think is ongoing, everlasting. It's like, you know, when you go on Facebook and there's a picture of a bacon sandwich and a bread bun. What do you call this? And all the different regions pile on and they go, it's a cob, it's a bap, it's a barm cake. And then it gets put to one side for 3 months. Someone puts it back up. And it's a cob, it's a barm cake. Never agree. Nobody will ever agree because it's called different things everywhere. And I think what is a big club is the same. I think it's the same conversation. I think it's the same argument. Everybody has their definition of what a big club is. And it's one of my pet hates in football. And all of the worst things for me about football Twitter have come out on the back of Regan Poole's move to Portsmouth last night. Opposition fans coming on with salt crime, or Lincoln fans absolutely insistent that Portsmouth are no bigger club than us. Portsmouth fans insisting that we're a small club with a small club mentality. There's no one size fits all to this debate or discussion. So I wanted to clear up for you guys, or really just for a dog walk chat, to be honest, because Fee's away. I don't get human conversation very often while she's away. So it's a little bit of a to and a fro as well. It's good for me. Therapeutic, cathartic, then one might say. But I just wanted to chat about what we thought a big club was. And feel free to join in. Dom's on board. Good morning. Bri is on board. Good morning. And Ben, pod co-host, was angry last night, slept on it, and it's a bit spiky. Yep. I'm not going to read it all out, Ben, because again, like I said, I'm not delving into the Poole move. I'm not going to talk about that particular thing. I'm talking about Portsmouth. Are they a bigger club than Lincoln City? The answer, in my opinion, is undoubtedly yes. But we'll come to it. So what constitutes a big club? The first divider, in my opinion, separates clubs is the league that they play in. Case point, Stevenage just been promoted. If they go in for players now that Gillingham and Swindon are after as well, Stevenage will be the favourites to sign those players because they're League One, and the other two are League Two. Are Swindon and Gillingham therefore smaller clubs than Stevenage? In my opinion, no. But the first telling point is which division you're in. So you could say Lincoln City, in theory, are a bigger club, certainly in terms of the eyes of players that we can sign, than any League Two club. And there are obvious exceptions to that. There are slight crossovers. For instance, last season, if you were a player who could have signed for, Blackpool or Sheffield Wednesday in the transfer window in January, which do you make? Well, Blackpool were clearly coming into League One. Sheffield Wednesday were at the time and ultimately did end up going into the Championship. So perhaps that's where the lines blur. But in the summer, in this window, it's very unlikely that a player take money out of it completely, and I'll come on to money in a bit, but take money out of it completely. It's very unlikely that a player, for footballing reasons, will join another club in a different division. It could be just if there are huge differences between the two clubs. Let's say if you're a Forest Green or a Bradford City, that's a bigger choice. Do you play in front of one man and his dog, or do you play in front of 18,000 at Valley Parade, which has hosted Premier League football? You know, Bradford likely to be challenging for promotion, and the huge club. You know, for me, there's a crossover there. But Ben has said it's easy to argue Bradford are a bigger club than us. My first argument is absolutely not, in that we signed Pordy O'Connor and Charles Vernon last summer because they wanted to step up. In January, the league that you are in kind of defines club size. And it doesn't in sitting down and going, you're a bigger club than us, we're a bigger club than you. But you would actually be hard pushed to argue that there are any teams in the Championship that are, in brackets, smaller clubs than Lincoln City. Rotherham, on a level, perhaps, in terms of facilities, in terms of amount of fans, but in terms of how regularly they've had Championship football over the last 20, 30 years, bigger club than Lincoln City again. So take the division out of it. What constitutes, and if the wind gets too much, please do let me know, because it's quite windy actually coming up this back straight. What constitutes a bigger club in division? Now, the first thing that people can talk about almost certainly is attendances, size of crowds. So if you are a club that regularly gets 20,000 supporters, regularly sells 15,000 season tickets, you are, in many people's eyes, a bigger club than a team that sells 5,000 or gets 8,000 supporters. Could be argued that. However, there are some clubs that you would perhaps say that doesn't apply to, clubs who probably get, you know, lower attendances but still not small clubs. Bristol Rovers are a big club. They're a big club. Why? Well, they're from a big city for a start. Okay, they're the second club in Bristol. They're from a big city. They're relatively well supported. They would expect to be playing League One football every year. They're a relatively big club. Sometimes clubs that get, you know, large attendances can't be described as big clubs because of how long they've been in the doldrums. Wrexham, for instance, in the National League, you know, were very much of a muchness. They're not doing too badly now. Notts County in the National League, much of a muchness, not doing too badly now. Here's something controversial. When we're talking about clubs being smaller or bigger, I look at Notts County and Wrexham, and I don't particularly think there's a lot of difference in size between them and us. The same with Cambridge, Bristol Rovers, Oxford, Swindon, Carlisle. So then the definition of what's the bigger club is where you are in the division. So do you see what it kind of ties back round? So we're only really looking to define what's the difference between the clubs in League One. What makes Portsmouth a bigger club than Lincoln City? What makes Lincoln City, in my opinion, a bigger club than Fleetwood? Well, first of all, we've touched on attendances. Size of ground, potentially? Not always, because MK Dons, certainly not a bigger club than us in any respect, but with a much bigger ground. So I don't think you can talk about that. You can talk about attendances. Almost certainly attendances play into that. And that's probably one of the biggest indicators. Charlie, we'll go back. That's one of the biggest indicators is attendance size. Yeah, I think anybody who gets between sort of 6,000 and 8,000 is on a level. If you're getting 10 to 12,000, you're kind of that little step forward. But it's not always attendances as well, because Plymouth and Lincoln, not a huge amount of difference. Geography helps, it does. And we go to Plymouth, 12,000. Why? Because the catchment area is so big. So our catchment area is relatively big as well. So our attendances, in my opinion, are probably inflated a little compared to a Bristol Rovers, who have got a big club and a stone's throw away. Cambridge potentially have got, you know, a similar sort of catchment area. Exeter, a similar sort of catchment area. Oxford, a lot much tighter there with the likes of Swindon, Reading, teams like that around. So catchment area makes a difference as well in terms of attendances. So it can't be judged purely on attendances. Recent history. My dog's just strolled on. No bother, just left me. Recent history, I think, is another big thing to think about as well. And I made a point of it in my article about Regan, was that on the night we were getting knocked out of the FA Cup by Kettering. Does anyone remember that? I think they got a last-minute goal, didn't they, to beat us 2-1. So around the time we got knocked out of the FA Cup by Kettering, they were hosting AC Milan in the Europa League or whatever it was called. And that's in recent memory. You know, they've won the FA Cup in recent memory. They've been FA Cup final runners-up in recent memory. Really recent. They've only finished outside the top 8 in League One once since their spell in it began. The year 2017-18, I think it was, and that was 2 seasons ago. I think we've only finished above them once in something like 30 odd years. Does make them a bigger club. And, you know, teams like Grimsby could argue, well, we've been in the Championship much more recently than you. We've had consistent spells much more recently than you, but we have finished above them on a number of occasions as well, both in terms of the league and in terms of being in the same league but finishing higher. So that's much of a muchness. But if over 40 seasons or so, you can pick one season where your club finished above another club, it probably means that club's bigger than you. You can talk about facilities and structure if you want. I know some Portsmouth fans did. That's a really hard one to go by. That's a really hard one to use because we don't know what their structure's like and they don't know what our structure's like. And this is one of those kind of annoying kind of angles is where a Portsmouth fan will go small club. They don't know what we've got in place. They don't know what our training ground's like. They don't know what our recruitment strategy's like. They look at Lincoln City. They've finished above them all those times. They instantly infer that we're a small club. I find that very frustrating. Portsmouth were a team described to me as behind the scenes, years behind Lincoln City a couple of years ago by somebody connected to the club at the time. And that was in terms of their training, their medical team, training ground, all that sort of stuff. Light years behind Lincoln City from what we had put in place. Charlie, come on. So you don't know. It's hard to say. It's really hard to say. It's easy to look at a ground like Fratton Park and go, we're bigger than you because Fratton Park's bigger than Sincil Bank. But it's not. I mean, sorry, it's not an indicator particularly. So you don't know that. But Portsmouth are a bigger club than Lincoln City. 100%. Portsmouth are a bigger club than Plymouth that went up. Bigger club than Peterborough, who were challenging at the top end now. In terms of this division, they are, in my opinion, probably a bigger club than Barnsley. They're up there with the Derbys and the Charltons in this division as the giants of the division. And so if you're a player who's been playing for a club in League One who we may have promotion aspirations, we may have top 7 aspirations, fair enough, I buy that, that's great. But Portsmouth really, every single season when it kicks off, should have top 2 aspirations. No doubt whatsoever about that. And so a player looking at signing for a particular club has got to take that into consideration. Because if they're a top 2 aspiring club, they will be signing a better quality of player, you would think. They will be paying slightly more for wages. They will be more likely to have the squad depth to cover injuries and suspensions, to keep picking up results as and when it matters. So I think, again, those things come into play when a player makes that choice. In terms of league positions last season, they were 8th and we were 11th. I get it. It's a sideways step in that respect. But somebody, I think it was Sincil Banker on Twitter, Pete, always a grounded guy, not my mate Pete, he's always grounded, particularly grounded as well, but another Pete said, when Braintree and Danny and Nicky Cowley moved to Lincoln, Braintree's chairman said it's a sideways step. Charlie, we're going back, boy. Was it a sideways step? No, it elevated them to a different level. And they were able to transform our club in a way that they weren't able to with Braintree, because Braintree were, and again, it's that mentality, a smaller club, smaller ground, smaller fan base, lower expectations, lower wages. So to call it a sideways step is correct in terms of league position. But in every other instance, Portsmouth are a bigger club than Lincoln City. And I can't deny that. I'm a Lincoln City fan, and I can't deny that. A couple of years ago now, I remember having a debate with somebody on Twitter, and it was somebody, it was a decent debate. It was fair enough. It was somebody I respected. And I said, we're a similar size club to Exeter, Port Vale and Cambridge. And they said, how on earth do you bet that? We've just been to the League One playoff final I think three of those teams at the time, Cambridge, Exeter and Port Vale, were either in League Two or just been promoted from League Two. How on earth do you get that we're a similar size to those clubs? We are, because they're only one good season away from 8,000 or 9,000 fans. They're only a trophy away from having the same sort of momentum behind them that we had when we came into this division. And that momentum is really important. And teams reach a level and it can die out. Case in point is Bristol Rovers. When they came into the National League, they won the National League, they came through League Two, they hit League One, ceiling. We've kind of done the same, and we've hit a ceiling where now we need to develop, we need to push on. You can change your club size, don't get me wrong. You're not just one club size for ages. You know, we certainly feel like a bigger club now than we did when we were playing the likes of Welling and North Ferriby on a regular basis, so you can evolve and you can grow. But to sustain a growth and to be considered a bigger club, that growth has to continue over 10, 12, 15 years. It's not so long ago that the likes of Rotherham were Division 4 staples. It's not that long ago that Scunthorpe United were a regular knocking on the door of or appearing in the Championship. And I remember having this exact argument with a Scunthorpe United fan: which club is bigger? We all like to think our club's bigger. Carl Mercer, I did get your message earlier, by the way, man. I just haven't had time to respond. My prick's bigger than yours syndrome. It's all about performance when push comes to shove. No one cares about size if you're doing the right things. And there is such a good argument. Isn't it such a good argument? Will any of us give a toss who the bigger club is if we finish in the top 6 next season? Yeah, we revelled in the fact that it was little Lincoln City going to Wembley and playing Blackpool over and above the likes of Portsmouth and Sunderland and Charlton. We actually actively embraced being little Lincoln City then. And then when a player chooses a move to a club that it's a decent career step, we jump on it. I was as bad last year. I did it to Conor McGrandles. I was furious when McGrandles moved to Charlton for a day or two. And I actually got a message from one of Conor's relatives. I didn't know them, out of the blue, explaining a few things which I won't go into that would be unfair of me. And it just made me readjust and think. And you know, these are human beings, and it's just a job to them. In fact, the fact that they show the passion and commitment that resonates with supporters is credit to them. The fact that Regan Poole felt like one of us, that took the time to meet fans in the pub, that took the time to applaud fans, that won 2 Players of the Year. He felt like he was part of Lincoln City, but it was a job. And that's not to say they don't get emotionally involved. Of course, players get emotionally involved. That's why former players end up coming back and all that sort of stuff, you know, as with the Former Players Association and all of that. But the very fact that it hurts that Regan has gone proves that he was good at his job. If you're good at your job, are you going to stay where you are if somebody comes and offers you more money? I would at the minute, because I think I'm probably, you know, at my ceiling in my actual job. I've got great employers that I feel really comfortable with. I don't have anything to prove. When you're a footballer, you have something to prove. He's 24, 2-year deal. He's going to be on more money than Lincoln. Yeah, of course he is. Portsmouth pay more money than Lincoln City do because they're a bigger club with a bigger budget. They're not an artificial. I would have been pissed off if he'd gone to Fleetwood or if he'd gone to Wrexham, if he'd made a decision that looked like it was purely based on money. Moving to Portsmouth isn't a decision purely based on money. It hurts. Of course it does. I wanted to see Regan Poole in the Championship. I wanted to look for him on the team sheet like I do Cohen Bramall at Rotherham, or like I was doing for Teo Eden and for Anthony Scully. I wanted to feel that our club had developed another player. Another one goes on to better things. But he's one that got away. And again, I've seen some criticism of the club should have got him on a longer contract. If you don't want to sign a longer contract, you can't force him. We got him on a 2.5-year deal when he came from MK Dons. If we started handing out 3.5, 4.5, 5.5-year deals to players in order to tie them down, and they came in and they were shit from the off, where would we be now? Where would we be now if we'd been offering 4.5, 3.5-year deals out to the likes of Hacks, who, you know, lovely guy, but hasn't really made it at the club? Then there would be a criticism that we're giving them too long a deals. Really, really easy. Really, really easy to be critical. I don't begrudge Regan his move. People say I'm not looking forward to playing against him. we play against defenders on a par with Regan 1 week out of every 2 or 3, because the big clubs have got players like him. He will fit in at Portsmouth. He'll do well at Portsmouth. It's a shame that his championship move didn't come through. If I understand it, the Portsmouth press are reporting that he was on for a Sheffield Wednesday move until Darren Moore left the club. And that would have been a great move for him. Sheffield Wednesday, superb, just right. 3 across the back, right side of the defence. I don't think he's a fullback. I think if you're playing 3 across the back, I think Regan is better on the right of a central defensive 3. I think that's fairly standard. They're talking in the Portsmouth press about having signed a central defender. I don't think they see him as a wing back. That's where he's comfortable. That's where he's best, in my opinion. And in that position, he is a top-end League One, lower-end Championship player right now, 24 years old, off the bat done. That's it. You move on. He's not a player anymore. We'll make signings. We'll press on. We'll do what we do. He'll come back. I hope he gets a decent reception. I hope he does better with his big move than Connor did, because obviously it fell through for Connor. He went to a bit of a basket case club in Charlton and ended up on loan at Cambridge, who were relegated. So not a fantastic move for Connor. Didn't work out, but it hopefully worked out for his family. Again, Connor owed us nothing, Conor McGrandles, when he left. At least Conor McGregor there. We paid a fee for Regan Poole. We rolled the dice, and he's gone for free. These things happen. It's easy to say that that's not the model, but not everything comes off that you would like to come off. We haven't stood in his way. Regan was a professional with us, and he has moved, hopefully I've proven, to a bigger club. Look, we've ended up talking a little bit about Regan, so let's just go back down and pick up some of the other comments about the move. So Ben says, to finish off, big club in the division, but it seemed for all the world that the club expected him to be in the Championship, which is why we couldn't keep him. Yet, I think Jez George said when he left, we wished him luck with his move higher up the football pyramid. It hasn't worked. But I don't think it's misleading. I don't think that he said that with a view to move into Portsmouth. I think he said that probably by the sounds of things with the Sheffield Wednesday move in mind. If the Sheffield Wednesday move hasn't come off, other clubs not needed him. Sheffield Wednesday and Portsmouth. Sheffield Wednesday are a bigger club in terms of division and probably in terms of club size. But there are a few clubs in the Championship that I would say, are not the size of Portsmouth. It's not a bad move in that respect. Stu Fox, hello mate. Regan was fantastic for us and he obviously feels positive about the Pompey project. It's no different to us signing a player who likes the look of our settle versus another potential larger club. Wish him all the best, never let us down. It's no different to when he left MK Dons for us, except obviously we paid a fee. But it's no different to when Conor McGrandles left MK Dons and came to us, or Joe Walsh left MK Dons and came to us. They must have been thinking at the time, sideways step. Not over time, it's proven not to be. I have no doubt whatsoever for Regan, and it pains me to say this, I have no doubt that this will prove not to be a sideways step. If you ask 100 football fans who's going to finish higher in League One this season, Portsmouth or Lincoln, 99 will say Portsmouth. The only ones that will say Lincoln are either Lincoln fans or people trying to be edgy. Honest truth. And you look at the players they've signed, Anthony Scully, 20 goals a season for 2-3 years at this level, or 2 years at this level. Gavin White, 4 million player from this level not so long back. They've got good players there at Portsmouth. They're expecting to be challenging. At the end of the day, we may finish above them. I'm not saying just because 100 people would say that we won't. But the fact is that the expectation is that they'll be finishing above us. I wish him all the best in 44 games next season, genuinely. And actually, I'll have a slight soft spot for Portsmouth once we've got past playing them, because I like Scholes. I'm a big fan of Anthony Scully. He's a great guy away from the field. I've chatted to him since he's moved to Portsmouth. He's happy, he's settled. I think he's expecting with his partner. Yeah, I want them to do well. They were a part of a great Lincoln side that got to that playoff final, and neither of them let the club down at any point at all. So I do wish them well, just not against us, of course. Julian Soons, morning mate. There must be a correlation between attendance and promotion. Plymouth, Ipswich, Sheffield Wednesday, previous season, Hull, Sunderland, higher attendances, season ticket, no finance for wages. Yes and no, because Fleetwood could probably finance to a level that's somewhere near some of those teams, and it hasn't worked out. Maybe it's something to do with money, potentially, but when Hull went up, bear in mind that was the COVID season, so there was no fans in the ground then. I think you're just talking about teams that can attract a better level of player. There are only a handful of players that would take Fleetwood on £6 a week if Sheffield Wednesday were offering them £5 a week and both were guaranteeing first team football. There's only a certain type of player that takes the Fleetwood deal, and that's not the type of player that you would want to sign for you. Not really. And that might sound harsh. And I'm being really down on Fleetwood. They're a team that I've got no time for, as you know. Ditto Salford, ditto Forest Green. If you're a player that has 2 deals on the table and £200 a week makes you choose Forest Green over Bristol Rovers are better off without you. Lincoln City are better off without you, because you are making a decision purely based on money. And I think the good footballers make decisions based on much, much more: their career, the club they're playing for, potential progression. If you're making a decision purely based on money, you're not a player that I want to come to my football club. I don't want my football club to buy success. If we have the money to buy better players, that's different. I want to buy players that want to come to our football club. I want to pay wages for players who want to come in and buy into our project. It's sometimes hard to spot. Regan Poole hasn't gone to Portsmouth because they put eye-watering amounts of money in front of him. They may have done. He hasn't gone there purely for the money. Because if Portsmouth and Lincoln City offer you the same amount of money, Portsmouth are always going to be favourite in that race, in my opinion. Mark Williams, hello mate. Bigger club as defined by fan base. However, more recently, apart from Premier League big boys, more successful clubs now measured by how well they're run. Look at some of the clubs now in the Premier League. Too easy to define just on size of fan base alone these days. Portsmouth certainly have potential longer term, but short term believe it's about money rather than ambition. Just my thoughts. I do think there's a misconception that Portsmouth are trying to buy success. They've shed some relatively high earners. They should be in the top 5-6 budgets in this division. I think there's a big difference, as I've just said, between their financial aspirations and Fleetwood's. But the point you make, Mark, is brilliant. It really is. Brighton and Brentford, classic examples of 2 clubs that we have faced in the last 10-15 years, who, when we faced them, you might have thought they're no bigger than we are, but who will run well, that recruit well, that have the right strategies and structures in place. I mean, Brentford, fantastic the way, I think when Dean Smith left and Thomas Frank stepped up, they've got this cycle that goes on there. I mean, they are a team that do not get enough attention for what they have achieved, in my opinion. Bournemouth a bit different because they were funded by kind of Russian millions. I think Brentford has self-funded from buying players and moving them on, the likes of Ollie Hawkins and was it Neil Maupay? And Brighton, again, you know, a club that were a crisis club 20 years ago, nearly fell out of the Football League. Well-run, well-managed club. Both of those clubs have done what they've done, not based on their support, but based on their transfer policies, by bringing players in and selling them in for an increased rate. And with Brighton, I think a lot of that has kind of been bringing them in from abroad, whereas with Brentford, you know, they picked out the cream of lower league football, Ollie Hawkins being a classic example. And that's where I want Lincoln City to get to a point where we are considered to be a top 8 League One side who are able to go into the National League and sign, I'm not saying this player, but like a Macaulay Langstaff, and turn him into what he potentially, I'm not saying Macaulay Langstaff will be. He had one good season at Notts County, let's not forget that. He's got a lot to prove. To sign a young player with 20-odd goals in the National League, or 2 lots of 20-odd goal seasons, and he's 22, that sort of player. We're trying to do it with Kendall, trying to do it with Ben House. We're trying to turn these players into that. We're trying to become like Brentford, trying to become like Brighton, and our setup, I believe, is very much that way, kind of that way inclined. And look at it this season, few loans. We're not being connected to loan players. We will loan players, but the bulk of our squad is going to be ours. And the more players you own in your squad, the more likely you are to be able to sell those players on for profit, to then bring more players in, to then climb the league, like Brentford, like Brighton. And there are all manner of different things that need to fit into place. But if you're a Premier League team, you're a big club. Who would have thought 20 years ago that Brentford and Brighton would be considered as bigger clubs in reality than Sunderland, Derby? Very few people indeed. So you can change the size of your club, so to speak, absolutely. Kev, I hope you're well, mate. The Imps are as big as they've been for 60 plus years. Portsmouth have been FA Cup winners this century. They're much bigger than us, should add some spice to our fixtures. I wish Regan well, as he was totally committed in a Lincoln shirt, and Bry agrees. Dead right. We've never seen times like this. It feels like we're established League One now. It does. The last time we were an established League One side was under Colin Murphy at the beginning of the 80s. And that lasted, correct me if I'm wrong, Lincoln City aficionados, that it lasted for 81-82, 82-83 and 83-84. By 84-85, we were beginning to drop down the division and we were relegated. We had 5 years in League One at that time. This is our 5th season in League One. We had 1920 curtailed, 2021 where we were in the playoff race, 21-22 where we were again struggling a little bit at the bottom, and last season where we were mid-table. We are showing signs of stability. This will be our 5th season. Stay up this season, which you would certainly hope we're going to be able to do, and it'll be our longest unbroken spell at this level. Going back, I don't know if we've had 5 years as a 3rd-tier established club since the divisions went from Division 3 North and South. We had Championship for 10 years, but we went straight through again. So I don't think we've been up and stayed up for any decent period of time at all. We're at a great place. Great place. Simon Chanter, Sid, he's on to Portsmouth because Portsmouth could easily walk the league. Interesting to see if Reading starts season on minus points and if Andy Carroll will be staying there. Yeah, we could talk so much about Reading. I'm not going to, absolutely, but you know, they're a basket case club. I got so much Facebook abuse just for supporting him and pointing out his ability. I left all the Lincoln City Facebook groups, says Les Dorman. The pool has gone, but I suspect the haters are still in these groups. I remember when he first signed, and I won't say the guy's name because it would be unfair, but there was one poster in particular, was on Poole's back every single week, and it went over into the next season. So much so that I wrote an article 18 months ago, I think it was, the regeneration of Regan Poole, as if he had struggled the first year he was here. He wasn't outstanding, but as if he had struggled the first year he was here. Now we're all talking about him moving up to the Championship and playing well. Shows how quickly things can change, doesn't it? Look, I appreciate your time this morning. It pains me a little bit to be talking so much about a player leaving Lincoln City. We just need some gravity. And I fear that social media and this kind of instant gratification world that we live in now feeds everybody, and it feeds me. I read it at 11 o'clock at night, you go to bed angry. And it always pays just to have time. And there was some people who saw somebody calling him a snake on social media. Unfortunately, that's the point, to reach for the block button. I appreciate opinion, but you know, there's a time where I just think, and the reactionary bullshit that I read all of the time has to stop. I will occasionally react to things. All of us will. We'll all occasionally say something on social media that, with hindsight, we look back and go, maybe I was a bit harsh, maybe that's wrong. Certainly when something like this happens, when a player that we cared about so much, who played so well for the club, moves on. Let's not forget he won Player of the Year 2 years ago, not only because he was the best player, but almost by default. I think he was the only one out of the entire squad that reached anywhere near 40 games. Last year, incorrectly, he's been labelled Player of the Year. Paudie O'Connor won Player of the Year last year. Regan was one of 5 that could have won it. He was an important player for us, but we've moved on. We're moving on. And Kevin McGill, finally, it'll be interesting if Regan plays right back against the pacey Imps winger. I think he'll be centre back, Kev, really. I think that's where Portsmouth want him to play. I think it's his best position, and if they can play him in a 3, then fantastic for him. But, you know, it's 180 minutes out of our season where we'll be playing against Regan Poole and Anthony Scully. And when former players come back, they don't always do well. Some do, some don't. It is what it is. That's football, isn't it? It's the game we all love. So we'll all keep our fingers crossed for, you know, the game against Kings Lynn tonight. We'll be at Boston on Saturday. Hopefully see some of you there. And we can start focusing on the red and white, and not last season's red and white, not the season before, but what's coming up for the Imps.